So a couple things that you want to do prior to actually starting this series. The first one is making sure your system is set up by going to joincfe.com/YouTube, clicking on our playlists, and looking for the system setup. You might have to go to more, but basically install Django on Windows, Linux, or on your Mac, depending on where it is in particular. Okay, so that's one thing. The other thing is you might consider doing an entire project prior to jumping into this, such as our Try Django 1.10 service or any of the other Try Django projects that we have. So those are the two things that you're definitely going to want to do, so it gives you a little bit more familiar with Django. This is more of a conceptual thing. So we're going to go through concepts here that are built in Django, but they're made more for a reference than they are to be comprehensive like a project, where a project is going to show you the context of how all this stuff works together. What we're about to do is not. It's going to show you more about the conceptual things behind Django views, and more specifically Django function-based views. The other thing that I want to talk about is we are going to be using Sublime Text. This is our text editor. It's just something that we're going to be writing our code in, basically. So if you've watched any of our stuff, this is something you're probably fairly familiar with. Okay, so now that we've got that out of the way, let's actually get started. I'm actually going to go through the installation pretty quickly because I'm assuming that you've already gone through those requirements we've already talked about. So I'm on the desktop and I'm going to make a new virtual env using Python version 3. And then I'm going to call this just DJ Views, and then I'll cd into DJ Views. DJ Views, of course, being Django Views. And now that I've got that, I'm going to go ahead and activate it. Source bin.activate. If you're on Windows, you do scripts/activate, just like that. So /scripts. And now I'm going to do pip install Django. And I'll do == to 1.10.2. That's the Django version we're going to be working in. Granted, views in particular, we probably don't need to worry about the Django version itself. Changes might happen, but I just wanted to mention that. Okay, so now that I've got this, I'm going to go ahead and start my Django project with django.admin start project, and I'm going to call it DJ Views. Now that I have that done, I'm going to go ahead and open up this folder and change DJ Views into src. And then I'm going to open up Sublime Text and make a new project, add new folder to project. And of course, this is going to be going into DJ Views here. And then we're going to save this project as djviews.sublime project. Okay, so we've got our source there. And now I'm going to go ahead and create our first view. Now, the view files by default go into new projects. So if I do python manage.py new apps, if I do start app and then I say some app, in our case, I'm just going to call it blog. And oops, we aren't in the root of the folder, so we need to change into src where manage.py is. That's the root of the Django project, of course. And I'm going to go ahead and start that app blog. So if you come in here, you see this file called views.py. Now that views module can actually exist in other places. So if you look at URLs, the urls.py, we see that there are something called import from my app, import views. So we could do it that way, or we could even write in a views file inside of the Django configuration folder. That is where the app is, and also more specifically where settings.py is. So I can definitely write my own views in here. And we're going to do that. We're just going to make a very simple example of our own view in here. So I'll say from django.http import http response. So what views do is they take in some sort of URL routing and then they return a response. So we're going to be doing function-based views, which means that we define the function. In this case, I'll just call it home. And functions in Python, you want to always have lowercase. Classes, on the other hand, which you will see in class-based views, you would have it just like that. So if we were doing class-based views, that's how you would do it. But we're doing function-based views, so here's our home, and it's going to return something. In our case, we're going to return HTTP response, and we'll just say h1 hello world. Okay, so function-based views, or views in general, handle what's called requests. So if we actually look at our URLs, what they do is they map any particular URL to any particular view. Let's actually see this in action. First, what I have to do is take in something called a request. So a request is some data from Django that's allowing our view to handle all sorts of stuff. We're going to see this in depth throughout this whole project, but I just wanted to mention that right now. So since we now have this view function created, we can actually open up our URLs and doing relative importing. So from .views, import our home view. This is how we're actually going to want to import our views using version Django 1.10 and above. I'll explain some of the other versions in just a moment, but now that we've got this view, I can actually create a home view. Much like the example shows, I can just copy this right here, and instead of views.home, I'm just going to do home. Notice that I imported the actual function itself, so I imported the name of the function instead of the entire module. This is cleaner and more efficient to do it this method. Okay, so now I've activated these URL patterns. I can actually take a look at my project. I want to make sure I'm running the project with python manage.py, run server, and this is giving me my server, and I can go to that URL right there, and I see hello world. So what happened here was, if we look at this URL is mapping to this function called home. Don't worry about the name so much, but the function called home right there. So that function can be in somewhere else. So let's say, for instance, I said abc/ and then refreshed on that home page, it gives me an error. So if I do abc here, it takes me to that page. So that's a little basics of URL routing. Again, we're going to go into more detail there when we go forward. So this HTTP response is returning HTTP. It's returning HTML code. So if I actually wrote out better HTML code, so let's declare the doc type. So doc type HTML, and then we write out the actual HTML code for everything. So HTML body, all of this stuff. So this is just standard HTML code. And then I can also write in the head document here, and I can put some stuff in the head. So I'll just put h1, or excuse me, style. I want to put this style tag in to add some styles in here, and I'll do h1 and color equals to red, and that's it. Okay, so we save that and we refresh in here, and now I actually have that rendering. So what's really cool about this is actual HTML, right? So I literally just returned some HTML to be rendered inside of this actual function. Now, I mentioned a little bit about this request. So this request item, if we print it out, we can actually see it in our terminal. So I refresh in here. I go on my terminal. I see that I have the WSGI request. So you can actually Google this Django request or Django WSGI request, and you'll see more stuff about this. But knowing that I understand Python, I can actually do something else by doing print dir of request. What this method does is it's going to print all the available methods on that particular request. So I hit terminal. This shows me all of those methods. And these things I can actually play around with, right? So I know these things by using it so much, but if I do print request.method, I can see what the method is. I can do print request.isAjax. I know what it is, but I'll show you what it would be returned. Okay, so I'm going to print these things out. I'm going to get rid of the dir and the request call. I'll print those three there. I refresh in here, and I see the terminal. I see that the method is get, and then it says bound method of HTTP request is Ajax. So bound method meaning I actually have to run it like any sort of function would. So going back into that dir request, I can refresh in here, and I can actually see all of the different things that I can look at. So .user, so user, and the actual user model. So this is how we can actually work with logged in users, logged out users, stuff like that. I can get the full path. So let's see that one. So I'll print out request.get full path. So if I was you, this is what I would do. I would actually go through here, and I would copy one of these in particular. Of course, that's coming from the directory itself. I can copy that, save it, and then refresh in here. And then we'll see at the bottom, it's saying another bound method. So that means that this get full path, if I put parentheses here and comment out some of these other ones, I can actually refresh in here and I can see that it's giving me the actual path, as in the URL that is being routed to this view. So I can change this again. So if I change this to ABC, for example, refreshed in here and went back to ABC, so /ABC, and press enter, I can now see that my path is ABC. Very useful for all sorts of things here as far as routing is concerned. But now the idea is, okay, we've created this function-based view. We've returned some HTML. This is great, but it's not really that dynamic. Now, views themselves can be much stronger than this. So in the next one, I'm actually going to talk a little bit more about a couple other things that we can do with the HTTP module, and then we'll actually jump into really actual Django views. This is kind of like a hard-coded view. This is not what we want to do at all for the majority of the time. In some cases, we might have something like this, but the majority of the time, this is not at all what we're going to be doing. So if you have any questions on what we did here, let us know. Otherwise, we'll see you in the next one.